Ring of Honor. They added a debut show in Windsor, ONT on November 13th at the Novelletto Rosati Sports and Rec Complex, the day before a show in Mississauga. Austin Aries vs. Petey Williams in a non-title match takes place on September 19th in Chicago. Kenny Omega vs. Claudio Castagnoli has been added to September 26th in New York. TNA regarding the creative direction. Vince Russo is lead writer but Dixie Carter is in charge of the big picture direction. There is no outright philosophy other than as noted on the first television shows, it seems to be going into a more sports-oriented direction. The two keys are the referees are given more power and would throw people out of ringside before matches on television. That's a code word for fewer run-ins and less outside interference. She also wants to have more of an emphasis on pushing newer guys, in particular Hernandez, one of her favorites, Bobby Lashley, but they will push as a two-sport superstar, and Matt Morgan, a longtime Jim Cornette favorite. The announcing change is part of it. The replacing of Don West with Taz is part of a change to a more sports-oriented announcing team and less the 2 hours of high-energy Don West style that Jarrett was in favor of. The update on Jeff Jarrett is that he is still with the company and remains part owner. He is not expected to be doing anything on television for a while because of the situation with Kurt Angle, nor is he expected to return to being a force on creative at any time in the foreseeable future. As far as what happens next, if Angle has a meltdown or leaves or somehow isn't around, Jarrett would probably come back as talent. As far as coming back from a creative standpoint, that probably isn't happening anytime soon if at all. Jarrett is working from home, and working on TNA business projects such as making trips overseas to put together international TV deals and other business deals. Carter will appear on Impact for the first time on the August 27th show, doing an interview where she talks about signing the 3-year extension with Spike. Lashley's first matches will be on the upcoming house show Swing this week in Texas on August 28th in San Angelo, August 29th in Abilene, and August 30th in Belton, Texas, doing singles matches with Eric Young twice and Sheikh Abdul Bashir once. He's also going to have a singles match on the September 20th pay-per-view show. They have commercials playing building the show around his debut. I had figured him to be in a multiple-person title main event where the work would be spread around. He'll be doing a singles match with the Angle shot on August 31st or September 1st. The pay-per-view is only 13 days before his next MMA fight, and that surprises me, as well as going out on a house show run 5 weeks before the fight. Usually the last week before a fight is a resting week, just doing some technique drills so your body can heal, but the week before that, which would be the week of the pay-per-view and tapings, would be his hardest week of training. In a multiple-person match, he can be hidden and really just do a few select things and keep the injury risk down. In a house show match, you can do house show style, although I'm surprised to see him doing a house show run. On a pay-per-view, it's hard to do an easy match. But I wouldn't want to be doing a hard physical pro wrestling pay-per-view match 13 days before an MMA match. The Lashley vs. Ron Waterman MMA match we wrote about some time that had been verbally agreed to by both sides for October 3rd in Denver is now signed for the Ultimate Chaos Group, which has Lashley under contract. Strikeforce, which is open to co-promotions, has contacted Ultimate Chaos if Lashley signs an extension regarding working with them and using Lashley on Showtime events. Scott Coker has been interested in Lashley for some time, and they were in serious talks at one point, but he got a better offer from Ultimate Chaos. Strikeforce is essentially and primarily a television promotion, so ratings are the key, and somebody like Lashley with good name identity will mean more than a more experienced fighter with more MMA pedigree. There is also the feeling that Lashley will be good for MMA ratings because being someone who is on television weekly, he will have a regular fan base which nobody else in Strikeforce has. As far as non-UFC talent, when it comes to Yahoo, which is probably a good indicator of TV ratings viability, not necessarily pay-per-view drawing power because spending money is a different kind of appeal, the names who seem to garner the most interest are Fedor, Carano, and Lashley. The idea is to push Lashley as a two-sport superstar, with the tagline that Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders did two sports, but they were in different seasons and each did one contact sport and one non-contact sport, while Lashley is doing two contact sports simultaneously. As far as on a big level in the US, the closest is Dan Severn doing both at the same time, but he was doing indie pro wrestling for the most part. He did SMW when he was a UFC headliner, but when he was in WWF, he didn't do MMA. Tons of guys did both at the same time in Japan, like Don Frye, Bob Sapp, Yoshihiro Takayama, and Kazuyuki Fujita. There were tons of guys who did pro football and pro wrestling, but it was also in different seasons. Bronco Nagurski is the only what I would call superstar in both venues who did pro wrestling during football season, and that was more than 60 years ago. It will be interesting if they push Lashley's fight on television. It is being considered, because there is the risk he could lose even though Waterman, due to age 43 and limited stamina, is considered relatively safe. But Waterman, 16-6-2, biggest name win is Kevin Randleman 5 years ago in Pride, is also far more experienced and has been on the big stage, being a regular at different times with both UFC and Pride. The company was apparently intent on making the announcing change sooner than later. The change itself was planned, but the idea was that the Joe/Taz angle would run its course, and the original angle was a long-term deal, including it coming out that they outsmarted the Mafia with Taz as a spy, which would have him then become an announcer. But they wanted the change right away. The later plan for the first TV was for Don West to start the show with Mike Tenay and Taz do the old NWO bullying thing at some point in the show and he'd leave. West himself asked that since he was done, he didn't want to be humiliated on TV in his final appearance and asked not to have to do the first couple of segments on the show. Bound for Glory will be promoted around it being Sting's possible retirement. They've already put together publicity with the idea of a photo of Sting with the writing "The Final Curtain." It's interesting because Sting gave the speech on Impact this week to AJ Styles about not quitting, and perhaps that will play into the promotion of the show. It is a semi-shoot in the sense that the past few years, Sting has always talked of it being his last year, and always is then talked into agreeing to come back for one more year. He's now 50, but he moves really good for his age. He's had lapses in the ring, but on the flip side, his promos over the past year have been the best of his career. In the past, when it came to signing him, Jeff Jarrett would question the price tag, but Dixie Carter always wanted him, thinking he was valuable for merchandising and licensing. The feeling is the company would like to keep him, and once again, the decision will come down to whether he wants to commit for one more year. He has a son who will be playing small college football next year, but with his limited schedule of just house shows and TVs, he could sign a new deal and not have to miss any of his games. Kurt Angle went on Bubba the Love Sponge, not to be confused with Bubba the Bulldog show in Pittsburgh the day before, on August 20th for 30 minutes. He never mentioned Trencha Bigger's name or Rocket Con, only saying she moved in and changed her mailing address to his address to establish residency. He claimed she wanted an engagement ring, she tried to export lots of money and threatened to ruin his life and his career. People within the company are for the most part sympathetic to Angle on the Trencha Biggers aspect, because he had discussed enough things such as her pressuring him to get engaged and married that parts of the story were consistent with things many in the company knew as opposed to contradictory. Bubba brought up a figure of $50,000 at this point, which Angle did not confirm nor deny. He said that he was afraid of her, but didn't specify what that meant. He said he didn't even talk to her when they were living together. He said they never fought, but he would keep asking her when she was leaving. He said she was always on the computer and would hide what she was looking at when he'd come in the room. He said that in the protection order she claimed he yelled at her and said something similar to what another celebrity/wrestler said about his ex-wife. Bubba immediately brought up the first thing you'd think of, given celebrity wrestler is probably a small category, and saying something negative about an ex-wife would probably limit it to Hogan or Flair, and Flair has never said anything publicly that would be that famous or get anyone in trouble. Hogan did make the understanding OJ remark to Rolling Stone, and Bubba immediately brought that up. Angle said he couldn't answer that question. Angle said that a week before this went down, he had talked to police about what he could do to get her out of his house, and they told him there was very little he could do. He said that happened on August 14th, was she said she wanted to talk and he said he wanted to go to bed. He said she asked at 11:30 p.m. that night to borrow his car because she wanted to go to the store, and he thinks that's when she went to the police. The next morning, 4 police cars came, including the officer who he talked with the week before, told him about the order and to leave. He said he left, and video surveillance cameras in his gated community showed that she followed him out. He said he went to check into a hotel and was circling in the hotel parking lot, not the Starbucks parking lot, and talking on the phone to TNA officials, his attorney and his agent first. He then pulled into Starbucks, near the hotel, and that is when the police in Robinson Township, he lives in Moon Township, arrested him. He said his HGH was buried deep in an old bag he had grabbed while leaving. The vials were 2 years old and he didn't know he had them on him. He said he had them prescribed for a neck injury. He said they could test him and he'd test clean, no doubt. HGH tests do in theory exist and were used at the last Olympics, but nobody was caught, indicating their real-life effectiveness is close to nil because it's doubtful every single Olympic athlete was clean of that performance-enhancing agent. He said this has been an embarrassment to himself, to his family and to TNA, and noted this all happened when things were going good, as he had 4th movie deal and a recent magazine cover. He said he thinks TNA wanted to keep it under a rug since both worked there, and he didn't think TNA would have given him permission to do the interview with Bubba. It's interesting he went on Bubba after in the dressing room being so negative on Bubba over the Karen Angle and Jeff Jarrett's story breaking on his show. There was only one mention during the show of that situation, when he remarked about what a tough year it has been regarding finding out you-know-who was dating you-know-who. Angle said he doesn't want to date anymore and doesn't know what he was thinking dating her. Angle called Brock Lesnar a buffoon and Neanderthal when asked about Brock's actions after beating Frank Mir. He said he still talks with Dana White, who was angry with Lesnar, and Angle said Lesnar did the wrong thing and won't do it again. Well, almost for sure, he won't do it again, because you can't do something like that twice. He said he thinks he could beat Lesnar mentally because he beat him when Lesnar was jacked up at 315. He said he could shut down Lesnar's takedowns because he did it before, but he doesn't know what would happen if they were to have a fight because Lesnar is one of, if not the best heavyweight in the world. Bubba said he thought Lesnar versus Angle would do business the level of Lesnar versus Fedor. It may very well, but I think that fight would have a very difficult time being approved by an athletic commission given Angle's age, lack of MMA fights and his injuries. But it would draw with UFC behind it. Regarding the much talked about incident in Fargo, North Dakota, where Lesnar and Angle went at it in 2002, he said one day Lesnar was throwing Show around when Kurt showed up, tapped Lesnar on the back and told Show to leave the ring, and Angle said Lesnar looked at him like oh no. He said they started wrestling and he took Lesnar down 8 or 9 times. Keep in mind in his recent article describing it he claimed he pinned Lesnar 3 times. Brock couldn't do a thing with me. He said the witnesses were Triple H, JBL, Jericho, Jim Ross, and Gerald Briscoe. Bubba claimed he heard the same story from Briscoe and Jericho. Angle said Lesnar came off as a fool on some TV show claiming he pinned me a bunch of times. Let's just say I've had the incident described to me right after it happened and the reports where Angle got the better of him, but it was close and not nearly as one-sided as either man claims. Jim Ross has written about seeing it and said that it was impressive to see Angle hold his own because of the size difference, but he indicated it was very close, but that Briscoe, also watching, thought Angle got the better of it. TNA will be adding a Knockouts tag team title, doing an 8-team tournament. This is probably a move because of Jeff Jarrett being out of power. Jarrett was strong on only having 3 titles, the heavyweight, X division and tag team, before adding the knockout division and a 4th title. There had been talk at times of an X division tag title that had support, but Jarrett felt that the more belts you have, the less important the belts are, which in theory makes sense. The problem is the belts have to be important to begin with. It's a TV product, and even though X division tag titles will lead to better matches, the women draw more ratings than the X division guys. So it's just as well to give them something else tangible to be battling over. None of the belts, nor for that matter anything TNA does, actually draws in a traditional vein, so it's not like the fear of UFC becoming boxing where you add more belts and it kills the drawing power of the belts. But there is hardly the depth to do it. 4 of the teams are Sarita and Taylor Wilde, Kong, and Raisha Saeed, Tracy Brooks and Sharmell and Tara and Christy Hem. Figure beautiful people, and possibly they'll put Diener and ODB in there for comedy. A correction from last week regarding Taylor Wilde. While she didn't wrestle, she did appear on the first show in a backstage interview and briefly was on camera in front of the people coming out with Sarita when Sarita worked the 4-way. Also in the Awesome Kong vs. Tracy Brooks vs. Sarita vs. Christy Hem match, the report we had was Sarita was pinned and I wrote how it didn't make sense because they could have pinned Hem, who wasn't new. As it turned out, the way the finish was booked, Kong had laid out both Sarita and Hem, but it was Hem that Brooks pinned, so whomever made the call, likely Vince Russo, was thinking the same way. Mick Foley and Colt Cabana did a comedy show on August 22nd in Los Angeles at the world-famous Hollywood Improv. Told it was a good show and a one-of-a-kind experience. Among those in attendance noticeable were Christy Canyon, a porn star Foley is friends with, Barry Blaustein, Beyond the Mat, Daniels, Adam Pearce, and Brian Kendrick. Cabana opened the show wearing his never-worn on TV Scotty Goldman jacket. He joked about it. His routine was mostly ripping on WWE, talking about how bland the Cena vs. Orton build-up has been and ripping on them for giving him the Jewiest character in wrestling history. Another report we got said he had great stage presence, but to really understand his material you had to be an inside wrestling fan. He got enough laughs from his inside jokes that there were enough in the crowd so it worked. He mostly joked about his time in WWE and learning that so many of his childhood idols were assholes. He made fun of himself as well, saying he was so low on the totem pole he couldn't even get over with Pat Patterson. Foley went on last and his routine also got over pretty well. Reports ranged on him from good to excellent, told great stories and could have easily gone another 30 minutes because people were enjoying his storytelling. He used good material that the wrestling fans in the audience could relate to, but also non-wrestling fans in the audience related to him. He told mostly adult-oriented stories, talking about subjects like sex with his wife and pornography. He went into detail about a tag team match where Bob Holly suplexed Al Snow, showcasing his package, which Foley told in one of his books. Foley is looking to do more stuff of that kind, including possibly doing something the weekend of Bound for Glory. There is also some talk of he and Jeremy Borash doing a touring comedy routine together. Scott D'Amore is looking at working as an agent on TV and PPVs. He has several other business interests, including the restaurant that has been mentioned, a shopping plaza his family has ownership of, construction and waste management projects, working with his father. He said he's back with TNA because he enjoys wrestling and wants to help TNA out, and if he can fit 5 days a month into the schedule to work in wrestling and relieve some real-world stress, then it's a good fit. On the pay-per-view, the guy whose standing was hurt was Brutus Magnus. I didn't really notice it more than once or twice, but the feeling was the Beer Money vs. British Invasion match was not good, because Magnus was out of position a lot. Magnus had impressed people regarding his potential in his TV match with Sting, but that went out the window here. Both Robert Roode and James Storm were noticeably upset with how the match went afterwards. On the other hand, the feeling on Foley vs. Nash regarding the crowd was that it was Orlando, and if that same match had taken place at an arena, it would have gotten over huge. It was pretty much universal that they laid out the best match possible for the two of them, and used blood in a way to enhance the match, but the live crowd which sees them so much wasn't moved by the blood. Samoa Joe is being bothered by a sprained lower back. Because it took place the night before the pay-per-view and almost everyone was in Orlando already, and the hotel they stay at has showtime. Most everyone in the company watched the Carrano vs. Cyborg match, and it was the talk of the company the next day. Jim Cornette in particular was talking about it, noting about how when you watch MMA, you come up with so many new types of finishes that have never been used in pro wrestling before but are potential good finishes. In fact, he was telling people he's compiling a new book of finishes. Most of the discussions were on what to learn from this and how to relate it to future business for women in both Strikeforce and pro wrestling. It'll never happen, but there was the obvious talk of how to use Carrano if she were to work for the company. Lisa Taravaron, in regard to the story in the Dayton Daily News on her status in MMA, in last week's issue, said she talked to a few agents and in a conversation mentioned one of them talked with her about fighting Kim Couture, but the money wasn't right. He said the agent, J.T. Stewart, wanted to float her name out there to see how much interest there was in her doing MMA and to say she was looking for a match with Couture. She said that Stewart is not her agent and she's not gunning for Couture. She said that she thinks she can represent herself in MMA since she has experience running her own businesses. She used to own a pizza shop and now owns a custom detail place called Black Widow Customs in Louisville. But she did respond to a Kim Couture interview in MMAJunkie.com where she said she would fight her but didn't know if she can make 135. Kim, I do walk around in the low 150s, but as a former bodybuilder and fitness competitor, know how to cut weight is good or better than most fighters. I cut to 119 for one show. I know I can get to 135, but frankly, you don't want me to. So Kim, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the heart you showed in your first pro fight. Couture broke her jaw on the first punch and fought 3 rounds without giving up, losing a decision. Tremendous. And you may be a nice stepping stone for me if I choose to drop down to 135. But as for the veiled insults toward me, I find them cute. Because for us to meet up in the ring, you'd be bringing a knife to a gunfight. She also noted she was planning on attending the September 25th Strikeforce show in Tulsa. Jenna Maraska will be gone for a few months as she is filming a Survivor reunion season in Samoa. Johnny Fairplay at one point was slated to be on the season, but ended up being cut from the original list. They had house shows over the weekend on August 21st in Robstown, Texas, near San Antonio, which drew 1,600, and August 22nd in Laredo, which drew 1,100. Both shows were headlined by Styles, I guess not retired, beating Joe in non-title matches, and Scott Steiner and Booker T over Beer Money. Impact notes from August 20th. Largely a good show. The show-long storyline was unique. It opened with Kurt Angle giving Matt Morgan this ridiculous story on why he stopped Morgan from winning the title and then pinned him when they were supposed to be working together. It was the one where he was knocked loopy and thought he was saving Morgan, not Sting, and thought he was pinning Sting. Morgan, with a total sarcastic reaction, all of a sudden claimed to have seen the light. Then later, he did an interview totally sarcastic, talking about Angle being an Olympic hero who would never lie, and strongly teasing that he was going to get revenge on Angle. Then in the end, with Angle and Morgan versus Team 3D, they worked together as a team and lost the match. One thing positive is this was the most over Morgan has ever been, particularly in the first segment where Morgan came off like a real star. In the segment, they seemed to be teasing something with Nash and Morgan when Morgan was going on about being the best 7-footer. Angle told his story and Morgan had a change of heart, admitted that he was wrong and agreed to team with Angle. Beer Money beat Doug Williams and Brutus Magnus in a non-title street fight. Earl Hebner threw out Kiyoshi and Sheikh Abdul Bashir. The idea, and they did this again later in the show, is the referees are throwing people out of ringside before interference with the idea of trying to give fans a logical reason why there will be fewer run-ins. Storm was tied to the corner but a ref untied him. Rude and Williams both bled. Storm cracked a beer bottle on Williams' head and by this time he was bleeding heavy. Rude pinned Magnus after a double-team power bomb. The Beautiful People did an interview saying Madison Rayne was kicked out of the group for screwing up the title match at the pay-per-view. Foley and Borash were backstage talking about the pay-per-view match with Kevin Nash when ODB and Cody Deaner started arguing over who was the women's champion. ODB was back to calling it the Knocked Up Championship and why would he want it. Foley asked why Deaner would want the Knockouts title and then Borash asked why anyone would consider NASCAR a sport. They talked about whether Dick Trickle was an athlete. Talk about a reference over everyone's head. Dick Trickle was a NASCAR driver from 20 years ago who Dan Patrick on ESPN used to always bring up, probably to make fun of his name. Then, channeling one of the great moments in TV comedy of the early 70s, ODB said she just assumed that if the team won then she would win the title. Deaner then said when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. Felix Unger gave this line in a courtroom case in an episode of The Odd Couple probably 35 years ago and it was a line copied on television a million times since. Anyway, it's no longer nearly as funny, but Cody Deaner isn't exactly Tony Randall. Foley said he'd make a decision on who the champion was next week. I think that's what makes TV comedies work and wrestling comedy fail more often than not is they have people who are trained at knowing how to deliver a line, and wrestling has people who are trained in headlock takeovers, who then never use those moves, but read scripted jokes. Abyss then came out and Foley gave him a blue flannel shirt as a gift. They were pushing a kinship between the two to get Abyss over as the next generation of Foley. Foley asked him if the feeling of warm blood streaming down his face actually felt good, and Abyss agreed. Abyss was touched and started crying and Foley said, "There's no crying in wrestling," out of the movie A League of Their Own. Love destroyed Rayne coming to the ring by jumping her and ramming her into the steps in the ring and beat her in 31 seconds. They put a paperback over Rayne's head with Velvet Sky's picture on it. Tara and Christy Hem made the save. Then came a comedy segment that was actually funny. Chris Sabine and Alex Shelley talked about never being on television, saying their goals are to have fun, get laid and get paid. They said since they haven't been on TV, they haven't been getting paid, so they were farming themselves out for public appearances and said how you can get them to come over to your house for enough money and they'll put you over. Or just hang out with you. Samoa Joe beat Homicide to keep the X title in a good short match with an Enzuigiri and Muscle Buster. They pretty well ended the Joe/Taz team in commentary with Taz saying he accomplished what he set out to do with Joe and that Joe can now fly on his own. Lauren announced the women's tag team title tournament. They showed Sarita and Taylor Wilde and Tara and Hem all excited, with Tara saying how WWE would never have given the women this kind of a chance. A four-way saw Brooks win over Sarita, Kong, and Hem. There was a spot so botched involving Sarita and Hem that it looked ridiculous. I have no idea why they didn't edit it. Kong gave Hem the implant buster and then gave Sarita the world's strongest slam and a splash. She went to the top rope to kill Hem, as Sarita rolled out of the ring, but before she could jump, Brooks ran in and got the pin on Hem. Kong was going crazy afterwards about Brooks stealing her pin. She was throwing chairs everywhere. It was to set up Kong and Saeed versus Brooks and Sharmell in the tournament next week. Pope D'Angelo Dinero beat Consequences Creed with a running double knees to the kidney, which was the WWE version of the Elijah Experience. Dinero worked as the heel but the crowd liked him. He looked good in his debut. After the match, Suicide came out and Pope bailed. Morgan did his sarcastic interview, talking about how honest Angle always is. His line was that he knew Angle would have his back, and he'd have his back. Styles came out to do his interview about leaving wrestling. Styles started his speech talking about having a tough upbringing and never quitting. His father never showed him love, growing up in a trailer park. He ended up in tears talking about how he lost the Legends title and lost friends like Eric Young and Samoa Joe, and spends so much time on the road that he's missing his kids grow up, and when he is home, he brings his business home with him. He was doing a good job on the interview and then said he was retiring. Fans were cheering him much of the way, and when he quit, they started chanting "Please don't go." Sting came out with no makeup on, almost looking like a father figure. It's too bad Sting couldn't talk like this in the 90s. Sting said that Styles was quitting. There was irony here given that Sting actually did leave wrestling for years because of his family, and wouldn't commit to a full-time schedule in real life, but in wrestling, the guy in work mode with the same thoughts was a quitter. Sting said that he's been looking at passing the torch to Styles and now Styles was quitting. It was weird because they did a program about how Sting didn't respect the young guys just a few months ago. Styles went to leave and Sting said that if he quit, it showed he was a loser. At the end, the two hugged. They didn't specifically say Styles was saying and tried to leave it as a mystery, but I don't believe anyone ever really thought Styles was quitting. That said, the crowd was real good on the segment considering there's no way they could have bought it, and the performance by Styles was very good and by Sting was exceptional. They showed one of the many Stacker 2 commercials for Angle. It's lucky that both Stacker 2 these days is under the radar, and TNA is way under the radar because I don't know that too many energy drinks would want a guy arrested for GH as their national spokesperson. Hernandez did an interview saying that at the right time, he would cash in his briefcase. He did once when Sting was champion, but didn't get a fair shake and Cornette ordered a rematch. Now Cornette is never on TV, Sting is a babyface, and it's almost the fall and he still hasn't cashed in on something he won that aired in early December. Eric Young came out to recruit Hernandez into World Elite. This segment ended with Hernandez not giving an answer. Bobby Lashley was brought out to the announce position. This was where the rush to get Taz on board created a weird dynamic, since Taz was with the Mafia and Lashley was an enemy of the Mafia. They tried to explain it by having Mike Tenay invite him and then sort of apologize to Taz for doing so without asking, but Taz not making a big deal out of it. Lashley wasn't there for long, as Angle came out and pie-faced him, and Lashley responded by punching Angle before security came out for a pull-apart. The segment was good in the sense they teased a future confrontation but didn't go all out with a big brawl. At least at last word, Angle was not scheduled to work with Lashley on the pay-per-view since Angle would be in a multiple-man title match and Lashley would be in a showcase singles match. Team 3D beat Angle and Morgan in the main event in a tables match. They had a good match of spots where one spot after another saw a guy about to be dropped on a table when the guy's partner would move the table for a save. There was a "We love Angle" chant. Taz claimed 3D invented the tables matches. I thought it was Public Enemy and Taz was there. The editing out of botched spots on a taped show leaves much to be desired. There was the spot where 3D went to suplex Morgan through a table and Angle moved the table. Except, well, he didn't move it far enough and Morgan's legs broke the table. They just ignored that it happened since it wasn't the planned finish and Mike Tenay explained that it was only the table leg breaking. Worse, it was the last table they had. With the table broken, Angle went under the ring to look for another one and there wasn't one. So the backstage people brought out a new table. Several years ago, this spot would have been on the all-time bloopers list, but today it's just everyday stuff. The finish saw Morgan about to choke slam Devin through a table, but Angle wanted Morgan to put him on the table and splash him off the top rope through it. Morgan went to the top, but both members of 3D got up and slammed him off the top through table to win. Morgan and Angle weren't happy at the finish. UFC and WEC. Frank Fertitta Jr., the father of UFC owners Lorenzo Fertitta and Frank Fertitta III, passed away on August 21 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where he was being treated for a heart condition. He was 70. Las Vegas Mayor Oscar Goodman spoke of him after his death to the Las Vegas Sun, saying, "Frank was one of the most successful business persons in the history of Las Vegas, and one of the great philanthropists of our community. He was a very special guy, a class act. He was sophisticated, quiet and unassuming, a master businessman." Born in Beaumont, Texas, he moved Las Vegas in 1960 working first as a bellman, and later was a card dealer, and worked his way up to where he was general manager of several casinos. He opened up his first casino in 1976, which was called the Casino and is now known as Palace Station. His clubs were catered to the locals, such as the people who worked at the casinos. He retired and handed the business over to his sons in 1993. There is a middle school in Las Vegas, Fertitta Middle School, named after him. Fertitta Jr.'s funeral will be August 29th, which means most of the UFC people won't be able to attend, and that it wouldn't shock me that Lorenzo Fertitta wouldn't be at UFC 102. Cable industry estimates for UFC 101 at this point is 850,000 buys, which has to be considered a huge success. Trending numbers still seem to indicate significantly larger numbers, as they were close to St. Pierre versus Penn numbers in Canada. One would expect the next 3 shows to do significantly less, but it will be interesting to see how the baseline low has changed, if it has since March's 350,000 number for Keith Jardine versus Quinton Jackson. Any increase above that for UFC 103 in particular against Mayweather Marquez and going with a Rich Franklin vs. Vitor Belfort main event will probably show if the new baseline has changed after the release of the video game and UFC 100. 104 of Lyoto vs. Shogun, and that is also a weird dynamic because of Brazilian versus Brazilian. Lyoto's last main event did well on his last show and got over great to those who saw it, but he was not the one drawing and Shogun isn't a contender there is a lot of emotional investment in. The biggest draw is really the UFC name on all three shows. Now 105 and 106 are going to be huge. If they don't beat 101 numbers it would only show that Griffin is a far bigger draw than anyone gives him credit for being. They had a $1.8 million advance for the August 29th show in Portland at press time, which would be in the range of 10,000 sold. The gate is healthy even though there will be a ton of empty seats and they may have to curtain off much of the upper deck like WWE does for a lot of its weaker drawing TV tapings. The Rose Garden was set up for about 19,000 if it had been a hot ticket. It won't look bad because they are doing discounts and they can paper at the end. They also just changed the pricing for a lot of unsold lower deck tickets that are now available for $100 when they were originally listed for $400 and up. The September 19th show in Dallas had sold 12,000 tickets for $2.1 million and the September 16th Spike show in Oklahoma City has sold about 5,000 tickets for $550,000. The company is getting even more aggressive when it comes to competition. Dana White has declared war on Strikeforce as noted, which means that every quality fighter in the Strikeforce organization will likely get a substantial UFC offer when their contract expires. It becomes a really weird deal because the Strikeforce matchmaker, Bob Cook, is also the agent and trainer of several Strikeforce contracted fighters including Paul Buntello, who's trying to get out of his deal and go to UFC, and Josh Thompson, as well as many of UFC's top stars like Cain Velasquez, Mike Swick, John Fitch, and Josh Koscheck. Most fighters, even if UFC just equals the money offered, will lean toward UFC because of greater exposure, meaning they can get more sponsorship money, plus there is the platform to make them bigger stars. For others, it's beneficial to be in Strikeforce even if the UFC money would be better. The top guys in Strikeforce will be seen as better in comparison because they'll be looking good against a generally lower level of competition. For example, Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler and Jake Shields are highly ranked as compared to UFC fighters who may very well be better, but since they are headliners and if they continue to win, they'll look better than guys winning some and losing some against tougher competition. Versus and DirecTV are having issues as unless they reach a new agreement, DirecTV has given warning they will drop Versus at the end of the month. The September 2nd WEC show in Youngstown, Ohio was also moved to October 10th, although contrary to our thoughts, the Versus/DirecTV issues had nothing to do with the moving of the show. In fact, Versus really wanted to keep the date, figuring that if, by some chance, no deal is reached by September 2nd, that DirecTV would be flooded with complaints about it and that would help their cause. The reason was that Ben Henderson, who was set to face Donald Cerrone in the main event to determine an interim WEC lightweight champion, Jamie Varner will be out for several more months with a broken hand that hasn't healed quickly, was injured in training. The undisclosed injury was to keep him out of action for a few weeks. The October 10th date, a Saturday night, was the date Versus had on its schedule, but the arena in Youngstown was booked. No new arena has been announced. Ticket money is being refunded for the show. Current plans are to do monthly WEC shows starting in October, at least through next summer. The 2010 plans are for 10 events on Versus and either 1 or 2 pay-per-view events. They are also looking at signing a regular Canadian television deal and want at least one of the events next year to be from Canada. The current plans are for Mike Brown vs. Jose Aldo to headline in November, Brian Bowles vs. Dominic Cruz and Miguel Torres vs. probably in December, and have Jamie Varner face the Henderson vs. Cerrone winner either in December or January. Uriah Faber is targeting December or January as well for his return. There are meetings for this week in Vancouver with the General Motors Place, the major arena, as well as local politicians trying to speed up the sanctioning process in the city. Right now, MMA is not approved in the city. UFC is planning on debuting there next summer if it is sanctioned. They are also going to have more meetings over the next week or two to get Toronto opened up. Frank Mir vs. Czech Congo is now confirmed as the semifinal on the December 2nd show in Memphis underneath Quinton Jackson vs. Rashad Evans. Yoshihiro Akiyama had eye surgery on August 26 due to suffering a broken orbital bone in his match with Alan Belcher on July 11. It's not considered major surgery. Thiago Tavares pulled out of the September 19 show in Dallas after suffering a torn meniscus in training. His opponent, Jim Miller, will now face a debuting Steve Lopez, who is 11-1. Ricardo Almeida moves down to 170 and has an interesting debut fight on November 21st in Las Vegas against John Fitch. It's a fight where the winner could be in a line for a title shot after the winner of Mike Swick vs. Martin Kampmann on September 19th. Dustin Hazelett vs. Karo Parisian is also signed for that show. MMAPayout.com reported that after the successful launch last month of the UFC magazine, that the company has committed to going to an every other month format. They are also increasing distribution to 325,000 copies. Right now WWE averages about 140,000 sales. It distributes closer to 300,000 of its magazine. The UFC also did a demographic study of those who bought the first issue of the magazine. 96% of the people were over the age of 21, with 75% falling between 21 and 34, which is amazing on two accounts. That is an age group that is difficult to sell magazines to, and it also indicates the magazine would be awesome for a target buy. 20% were between the ages of 35 and 44, with only 1% over 45 and 4% under 21. They didn't have a male/female split, but it's so totally a male-oriented magazine that it's not funny. So that's very different from the television audience where 35 to 49s at times beat 1834s and normally aren't far behind. Only 15% say they have ever attended a live UFC event, but 55% say they are planning on attending one sometime in the next year. 33% say they train in the sport. Just under 50% say when they watch UFC they do so with 5 or more people, and 84% say they are video gamers. Frank Mir on Fedor signing with Strikeforce. I think it's an excuse to dodge the top-level competition. As long as he never proves it, he can keep the #1 ranking. If he goes into the age and loses, he loses that. If he stays out of the cage and doesn't fight myself, Lesnar, Velasquez, Carwin and some of the other top heavyweights, he can always have an argument. Jon Bones Jones, the undefeated light heavyweight, is relocating to Albuquerque and joining the Greg Jackson camp. It's great for him but not so great for UFC, because that means Jones will be a teammate of Keith Jardine and Rashad Evans. That'll make it very difficult, if not impossible, for UFC to make those matches, as Jackson teammates at this point have said they refuse to fight each other. The November 14th show in Manchester, England, which will be on Spike, will have the first matches of recent TUF winners, as James Wilkes faces Matt Brown and Ross Pearson will also face. TUF final loser Andre Winter faces Rolly Delgado. Michael Bisping vs. Dennis Kang will be one of the headline matches. With Kyle Bradley out due to an injury, Philippe Nover will replace him against Sam Stout on September 16th in Oklahoma City. Alessio Sakara, who is very lucky he's still with the company, he won the decision over Thales Litis that he was extremely lucky to get in a horrible fight on August 8th in Philadelphia, where the guy who lost the decision was being fired almost for sure. Returns on the December 5th show in Las Vegas. Spike Special TUF Finals against Rosamar Poliaris. Dong Yun Kim has been offered a fight with Dan Hardy on the November 14th show. Dan Lazone's return to UFC has been delayed due to a back injury, and he's pulled out of his September 19th fight with Rafaelu Oliveira. Lazone, younger brother of Joe Lazone, was one of the fighters who came over in the Affliction deal. K1/Dream. Daniel Guida of Romania became as much of a star as you can become these days in one night in K1, as he captured the Japan Grand Prix tournament with just 5:15 of total fighting, setting a record. He broke a record set by Peter Aerts, who won an 8-man tournament in 1998 in just under 7 minutes. Guida knocked out John Love of the UK with a left hook in 1:28. Then he beat Sub Yuki of Japan with a low kick in an identical 1:28. In the finals, it took in 2:19 to stop Sergei Lashenko of the Ukraine in 2:19 with a hard low kick. Guida's low kicks were sick. He knocked down Lashenko 4 times before he couldn't get up anymore, all with hard kicks to the thigh. When he threw his first one on low, the entire audience did the Vince McMahon gulp. Okay, they didn't, but it was like there was this gasping sound. The tournament featured almost all newcomers, and only one established star, Melvin Monhof. Monhof stopped Rumazan Ramazanov of Russia and 2:16 via knockout. But in doing so, he suffered a shin injury and the doctors would not let him continue in the tournament. The show drew a sellout 4,137 fans to the Yoyogi Gym in Tokyo, but just the fact they ran a major event at Yoyogi Gym shows how far the promotion has fallen. The match that got the most publicity was the K1 debut of Yosuke Nishijima, former cruiserweight champion boxer, who went winless in K1. Nishijima lost to Peter Aerts, but lasted until the 3rd round in his first kickboxing match. Aerts destroyed Nishijima with kicks, both to the leg and body, which Nishijima had no defense for. But he took the punishment, but eventually his legs gave out from the punishment and was knocked down a third time by low kicks and it was stopped. Strikeforce. The numbers we had in last week's issue for Strikeforce were incorrect. The 13,976 figure was what the arena seating was set up for. There were actually 13,524 in the arena, which was a paid of 11,105, comps of 763 and 1,656 in the luxury boxes, and usually high number, which speaks to the interest in this show among area casual sports fans and industry leaders, since luxury boxes are usually very wealthy NHL fans or major area corporations, with a $735,710 gate. In a correction from last week, Bill Douglas on Figure 4 Daily said that he and another member of the California State Athletic Commission staff met with Cesar Gracie in San Jose, not with Nick Diaz as was reported here. He said they asked Diaz to come to the meeting but he didn't show up. Douglas said he never saw Diaz at the show. I never did either, but Scott Coker said after the show that Diaz was there and that he had met with Diaz. Douglas also said that the commission can take action when it comes to denying someone a license, noting they have a meeting this week regarding Josh Barnett, and could rule to suspend him from applying for 1 year, essentially the same time frame as a suspension if he was licensed and had failed a steroid test. However, a suspension would be honored by all commission states. The Diaz situation is different, because he was never denied a license. If he applies for a license and shows up and passes the drug test, he will be licensed, and there is nothing on the record which would prevent him from being licensed in another state. Jason Mayhem Miller on his web page said he would be facing Jake Shields to crown a middleweight champion, although didn't give a date or place for the match. Evangelista Cyborg Santos pulled out of the September 25th main event with Tim Kennedy in Tulsa, and is being replaced by undefeated Zach Cummings, 10-0. Former K1 star Ray Sefo, 38, faces Kevin Jordan, 11-7, in Sefo's second MMA match on the same show. Sefo's only MMA match was in 2005, when he knocked out Kim Min-soo. Jordan is coming off a win over Patrick Smith, a UFC 1 veteran, on July 31st in Salem, New Hampshire. Frank Shamrock has talked about fighting in December, which was tentatively the return to San Jose. Mitsuhiro Ishida's camp has yet to file a written complaint with the California State Athletic Commission after verbally complaining Gilbert Melendez was greased up in their August 15th fight in San Jose that Melendez won. Other MMA in the not a good sign department, Bellator, which had told fighters that it was going to be upgraded for ESPN Deportes to ESPN2 for a second season that would start in November, has moved that season to January. ESPN hasn't confirmed the upgrade, and with ESPN in talks with UFC, I'm not sure about them adding programming on one of their two major stations with a different promotion. Bellator has since announced a television deal would be announced within 2 weeks, and the shows will air live and claim it will be available to 150 million people. That would seem to mean being on a station with 50% US clearance. It's a huge upgrade from ESPN Deportes, but that would indicate no ESPN2, which has 86% clearance. Don Frye, after pulling out of the M1 show in a fight with King Mo after the show changed locations, has signed to face Dave Pee Wee Herman in the main event for Shark Fight 6 on September 12 at the Amarillo Civic Center. Herman, 14-1, was being pushed as a future heavyweight contender by Elite XC. Of his 14 wins, all were by stoppages and 13 were in the first round. But on the January 4th Sengoku show, when facing Choi Mu-bei, he gassed in the first round and was finished in the second. Strikeforce took over the Elite XC contracts at that time, and likely due to that loss, elected not to pick up his contract. Herman had signed with Bellator, but with Bellator's second season pushed back, he was looking for a fight. Frye, who turns 44 in November, won his last fight with the promotion on May 2 via choke quickly in the first round. Andrei Arlovski, Jake Shields and Eddie Alvarez are all going to be fighters during the second season of Bully Beatdown, which starts airing very soon. Another former wrestler, Daniel Puder, went to 8-0, winning a unanimous decision over Michael Clark on August 15th in Ontario, California. It was Clark's sixth straight loss. After the match they did an angle where Virgil Zwicker, 6-1, all 5 wins in less than 3 minutes, challenged him to a match on November 14th, in the same arena. Zwicker defeated Will Ritchie via decision on the same show. Gabe Rudiger, who gained some fame on the Ultimate Fighter reality show, beat formerly unbeaten Wander Braga with a guillotine in the second round on the show. Kathy Long, a kickboxing star in the 80s, now 45, made her MMA debut on the undercard, winning a decision over Avery Vilke. Long, in some unique trivia, was one of the announcer at the first UFC event in Denver in 1993. Andrei Arlovski, just days after his Russian roulette encounter, was at the Strikeforce show. Michael Joker Gaiman, 34, the king of the cage welterweight champion who had to be talked out of a suicide attempt by a friend in the Orange County Police Department on August 11th, posted after being released from care on the Underground Forum, "I have been hiding behind my smiles and jokes for many years. Over the years the stresses of fighting, family, business and coaching has built up into the mother of all meltdowns. I did try to commit suicide that day and thanks to my wife and Jim Emermino, the police officer, I'm here today. From that point, the sheriffs took me to the hospital where doctors and psychologists could help me and analyze my situation. They say everything happens for a reason, and I believe that because I am alive today and now realizing that I need help, and would have never reached out for help without having hitting rock bottom and being forced to." Sengoku is trying to push a new star in Takenori Sato, 24, who debuts on the September 23rd show in Saitama against Joe Dirksen. Sato is being pushed as the protege of Kazushi Sakuraba. Nick Thompson vs. Dan Hornbuckle was also announced for that show. Thompson is off the August 28th M1 show in Kansas City, WWE. The company was working on a lot of business deals during the week in Los Angeles. Already announced is a deal with Gorilla Nation, which handles digital advertising sales. Lillian Garcia actually has a few weeks to go on her contract. At one point it had been said it was up at the end of August. She posted after Las Vegas that she has a few shows left. No guest host was announced for the August 31st Raw at press time. The word we got is that the reason nothing was said on television was because it hadn't been confirmed as of Monday night nor by press time. Jim Ross, on his blog this week, brought up something many have been talking about in all companies of late, which is that his contract expires at the end of the year. With Ross' role changed to color guy on SmackDown and grooming Todd Grisham for the lead spot, it's led to a lot of speculation whether he will be offered a new deal and just as much, if he will take such a deal, as he's openly talked using words like vacation, which are not usually in the pro wrestling announcer vocabulary. Ross and McMahon have a unique love/hate relationship that right now is probably neither love nor hate. There have been so many times that Ross' career as a WWE announcer has been written off, including one firing, one contract not being renewed, another few times where he was considered done, only to be brought back each time when various replacements like Michael Cole, the first time, Jonathan Coachman and Joey Styles didn't work out. In 2005, WWE attempted to orchestrate the hiring of Mike Goldberg from UFC, wanting him to debut the night of a live UFC vs. WWE television confrontation, with the idea of having his sneak out and come to the WWE show, leaving UFC without an announcer. At one point it appeared he would come, although he under any circumstances has noted that he would have never skipped the UFC event and not given them notice, but then decided he would stay with UFC. In hindsight, that was probably the best move for all concerned. It wasn't long after when they had Linda McMahon fire Ross as part of the Linda McMahon heel turn, which, ironically, was dropped immediately after. But that firing was meant to be his swan song on the air with Coachman as the new voice of Raw. There was also another example that never really went public in 2007, as the idea was that Jim Ross would be put into the Hall of Fame, and then they would do a big send-off as that would be the end of his career, with Cole taking over at that point. However, when his induction was announced in Chicago, the crowd response shocked everyone to the point the company felt they would be risking a backlash by having him retire at that point. Instead, in 2008, he was moved to SmackDown in the draft. Ross, 57, only said, "I'm still not at that bridge yet, and those types of decisions will be made later in the year in a professional manner," which seems like a code word that neither side knows what is going to happen at that point. "Let me make it clear that I doubt that I ever fully retire from the workforce and that I will always be involved in something, whether it be continuing to build our Junior's Family Barbecue brand or doing other projects of which I have an interest." He also said, "Would I like to slow down a little and not travel every week? You bet, if it could be arranged, but again, time will tell, and it certainly isn't something that has me concerned." He later posted that his contract status is not an issue, "We will strike a mutually beneficial arrangement or we won't. It really will be that simple in my mind's eye." He also wrote, "My life is great and I have many options in a variety of areas that I have bona fide interests in being involved. Taking a few months off might not be a bad start, or so says my best friend, my wife January." He then wrote that his contract issues are not a story but simply a business matter that will work itself out in the best manner for all involved. Given TNA's hiring of Taz, there is also that aspect as a possibility. His name does come up at TNA, particularly when you have people like Jim Cornette and Mick Foley, who are two of his closer friends still active in the industry, as well as people like Kevin Nash and Taz, who he has a good relationship with, as well as Jeff Jarrett being out of power. There are bad feelings with Jarrett and Ross, as noted by Jarrett in the DVD TNA did on him, over Jarrett's last days in WWF and Jarrett feeling Ross lowballed him on a contract renewal which Jarrett ended up not signing and moving to WCW. This led to a situation where Jarrett held up the company for more than $150,000 on his last day since he was IC champ, when that still meant something, but was no longer under contract and was in a pushed pay-per-view match with Chyna. WWF did pay him the money and he did drop the title to her. It is something talked about within TNA as a possibility, and also that he would probably get a good offer from WWE this time because of the feeling they don't think McMahon would want him on TNA television. TNA doesn't tape every week, but they do TV show voiceovers early every week in Nashville when they aren't in Florida, so the commentary is up to date. It's shorter travel from Oklahoma and less time, but it's still weekly travel. And there are obviously other administrative roles he could do there besides announcing, and Ross still handles payroll for the talent in WWE, or in addition to announcing. And not that this matters, because if it did, they'd have never tried to replace him so many times, but when the announcers come out at every taping, the fans treat Ross like a big star. They still boo Cole when he comes out on Raw, and the only other announcer who gets any significant reaction when he comes out is Lawler. Another aspect is that Ross' other major business is running his barbecue restaurant. While the vast majority of customers, according to readers in the area who go, are not wrestling fans but people who go because the food is good and inexpensive, it is clearly better for him for that business to be on weekly major television. Obviously Raw would be far better than SmackDown, but SmackDown is also far better than Impact. Plus his being the famous and still active wrestling announcer helps when it comes to the national publicity for the place that seems to come during football season with his close association with the University of Oklahoma, and his restaurant caters food for the tailgate parties at the home games. WWE really doesn't see TNA as competition right now, but they do hate it when guys leave for TNA, and that's been expressed strongly. It's one of the reasons Ric Flair has never really seriously considered TNA, because he doesn't want to burn that bridge, even though TNA would almost surely make him a good offer because his name on the product would help them in the international distribution business as well as worldwide licensing. Ross also predicted 1 million buys for the November 21st UFC show with Brock Lesnar vs. Shane Carwin. The company is considering for 2010 adding an annual tournament, similar to King of the Ring, as a pay-per-view, as well as doing TLC-themed pay-per-view where all the main event matches would be TLC matches, as well as a street fight pay-per-view, where all the main events would be street fights. How does that differentiate from Extreme Rules Night? This past week they put together a survey on their website asking fans if they would be interested in pay-per-view shows with the main events based around all three concepts. The Los Angeles weekend was very quiet, even though there was a fan axis. Brian Josie, Abraham Washington, rubbed some people the wrong way with them, saying he is the same in real life as he is on television. Everyone was kept very busy. Nobody outright said it from the office, but there was a feeling it was because they didn't want anyone attending Mick Foley's show at the Improv, and a lot of those interested noted how they were kept busy. The entire crew was in Los Angeles and nobody attended WWE, and Foley is generally very popular among his peers. WrestleMania tickets for Phoenix are scheduled at this point to go on sale on November 7th at 10 a.m. They will be priced this year at $755, $255, $155, $100, $80, $60, $45, and $25. In an effort to help prepare the younger talent for the changes in life when going on the road, traveling, and stardom, they are adding personal life development courses for new talent signed and sent to Florida to provide skills and solutions for out-of-the-ring issues that can hurt their career. They are also offering personal finance education classes for all talent, concentrating on the importance of financial planning, saving for the long-term, balanced portfolios, and managing financial responsibilities, working with Fidelity Investments. They are also adding workshops on how talent can best get health insurance for both themselves and their families, since the company doesn't provide it. They are also offering a media training workshop to teach talent how to best present themselves to the media and how to best present the brand to the media, bringing in Kathleen Hizert, the president of Sports Media Challenge. Here is a scary stat that you won't be seeing in a Did You Know segment. UFC 100 in North America looks to have done slightly more buys than the combined total of all 7 WWE pay-per-view shows of the first 6 months of the year combined, which includes both Mania and Rumble. In fact, UFC 100 and UFC 101 combined will likely do only slightly less than all 14 WWE shows of 2009. Once you bring TNA into the equation, it's scarier. UFC 100 should be due a little better than the next 6 years of TNA shows, provided TNA maintains their current level, which at this point is averaging about 20,000 buys per show, some higher and some a little lower. And on television, TNA's ratings for Impact are at the same level as UFC's for Ultimate Fighter, and not all that much lower than when UFC runs a live special on Spike. This week's Did You Know noted Raw beating Monday Night Football last week on ESPN, of course not mentioning it was preseason football. They are pushing the August 29th WrestleMania replay on NBC really hard, so that rating will be interesting. It'll be down a little because the New York NBC affiliate won't be airing the show due to a Jets vs. Giants preseason football game. It will only air on a digital station in the country's biggest market. To show how hot WWE is in Mexico, both Raw and SmackDown are among the top 20 television shows in Mexico. Raw in May was the fourth highest rated show on Televisa CH5, and SmackDown was the fourth highest rated show of the month on CH7. In April, Raw did a 13.1 rating and SmackDown did a 13.2. While UFC 100 has been publicized as a 13.3, that was only the Lesnar vs. Mir fight that hit that number, not the show as a whole, although an episode of Unleashed in a prime time slot actually beat Raw and SmackDown. Reports that UFC 100 had 25 million viewers in Mexico that have been printed are erroneous. Mexico's population is 109 million. A 13 rating would probably be closer to 8 million viewers, which is a great number for that country. Kane, in a Daily Star interview, downplayed any talks he was thinking retirement. He's now 42. I'm still having fun. An important part of the company. As long as I can be good at what I do, I'll keep doing it. It's very unique. There's nothing like being out there. It's my favorite part, having a match and knowing that I have been able to elicit certain responses from the crowd that I wanted to, then I've done my job and they've got their money's worth. It's what I love to do. There aren't many other vocations where you get that instant gratification. Regarding the move to a PG product, which probably curtails some of the wackier angles for his character, I'm not involved in that particular process. It's neither here nor there to me. You have to understand, if you watch anything, baseball or soccer, everything is going to change over time. Static is not interesting, everything morphs and evolves. He noted Undertaker Michaels as the best matches he's ever seen and noted that in the ring, kid-friendly or however it's promoted, the bottom line is action in the ring and how good the performers are. Well, actually that's only a small part of it. Maybe there's times for things to be more hard-hitting, but by the same token, I understand what the company's doing and I think it's a good move. When I started, it was aimed more toward the younger audience, and then in the Attitude Era it was certainly aimed at a more mature audience. Now we're back to the young again. It falls naturally to you over the years. The most interesting aspect is that during the Attitude Era, the average viewer of Raw was 24 and the number of teenagers and kids watching were astronomical. Now, the kinder, gentler WWE aiming at kids draws tons less kids as far as viewers go, and Raw's average viewer is 36 to 40 depending on the week, and ECW has ranged from 44 to 47. The company pulled a funny PR coup, getting an article in the New York Post to tout that gentler, less raunchy WWE as leading to an increase in women viewers. They cited being up 14% with women 25 to 34 and 23% with women over 50. However, what they did was add up their weekly cumulative rating and compare it with last year's second quarter. Last year the rating combined 5 shows: Raw, SmackDown, ECW, the Raw replay on Moon 2 and the Raw replay on USA. This year the rating combined 9 shows, with the addition of the 4 airings of Superstars on WGN. Women viewership by percentage on Raw, the flagship show, has been pretty consistent at 30% to 34% for more than the past decade with no substantial fluctuation. That was the same percentage in the late 90s Attitude Era. An average of the last 5 weeks has been a 67.2/32.8% ratio of males to females. They have gone public claiming the female number is 40% in the New York Post and 36% in the Los Angeles Times. But women viewers on Raw are up, because total viewers are up, just as women viewers are way down on SmackDown, because overall viewers are way down. By percentage it's fairly consistent. As far as a direct apples-to-apples ratings comparisons for the second quarter, figuring the 3 shows in the same time slot, and even including the ratings gimmicks on Raw with the commercial-free show, total WWE ratings are down 2.4% year-over-year during a time period when virtually all sports are up. The difference between PG and PG-13 likely has zero to do with any increases or decreases, but obviously you manipulate numbers for the media to suit your cause, and right now the cause is they are growing due to toning down the product and it's attracted tons more women. TNA, on the other hand, over the same time period, is up 21.6% in ratings with a product no more or less tame than a year ago. The funny part of the story was stock analyst Alan Gould, who explained the reason for the large increase in women viewership is because these guys all look like bodybuilders instead of just big guys. Actually, there seems to be less emphasis on physique than in the 80s and 90s. WWE does draw a higher percentage of women than TNA, and very slightly higher than UFC. It's nothing but a marketing pitch, but WWE COO Donna Goldsmith said, when we were a little more edgy, we lost a lot of women. They weren't as comfortable watching with their kids. But now that we are more family friendly, it's a perfect reason for them to come back. Actually, if you compare it to 1999 to 2000, for Raw and SmackDown, those numbers destroy the numbers of women and kids today, and one would presume, mothers watching with kids. In some ways, you'd think differently, but one thing I've learned about pro wrestling is that the less kid-friendly you make it, the more kids will watch. But even though more kids will watch, less kids sponsors will buy, so there is a balancing act they are trying to play, plus it's better for the company's image. The article said the company is researching toy lines, clothes and other products targeted at women, and credited the change in philosophy for getting Pepsi Max and 7-Eleven as sponsors. A more in-depth version of the same tamer WWE article was in the Los Angeles Times after SummerSlam, saying much of the sexual innuendo, over-the-top trash talk, blood and scantily clad females of 10 years ago are gone. In the article, Cena claimed credit for the change in direction. That isn't the only place he's made that claim. I'm just waiting for 20 years from now when he'll claim he invented playing to the crowd between moves. The story said SummerSlam was expected to do about 500,000 pay-per-view buys in the US. Not a chance in hell. The story said, and this is likely the story WWE is trying to get out there, is that MMA is now attracting an older and rougher crowd, the less desirable crowd that people thought wrestling attracts, which is why sponsors weren't hot on it, while WWE is targeting kids and families. Maria talked about changing her outfits with no more lingerie matches, saying the guys miss it. But that's how it goes. She said the women get reprimanded for showing too much cleavage. Well, if that's the case, there must be a lot of reprimanding going on, since on Raw this week, several of the women were clearly dressed in costumes to emphasize it, and nobody gets on TV without getting stuff approved, so that sounds completely dubious. They are strong on the image making as a way to combat the usual negativity wrestling gets for being sleazy, and to try and attract new advertisers who normally avoid wrestling for that reason. When it was brought up about fans complaining about the new direction, Cena said, "You can't please everybody. Our business was down and the product was becoming old and stale." The raunchiness and product becoming old and stale are two completely different arguments, and business has been down all year, which is more economy that product delivered anyway. They credited the toning down of the product to adding Pepsi, Attendant and Procter & Gamble as sponsors. The story also noted McMahon talking about launching his own cable channel, like the NFL Network. With stations like HDNet and Versus both either being dumped or in danger of being dumped by major providers, getting a lot of clearance will take time. The first time I heard of Vince talking about launching his own cable channel was in 2005 when Spike announced they were dumping Raw and nobody but USA was interested, and Vince cut such a weaker deal, losing all ad revenue on the shows in 2 of his 3 shows, because nobody but USA wanted the product. At that point he realized that the nature of his business is that it will die without television, and the television landscape can change. Vince said he was targeting 2 years from now to launch it. I sense it would just be 24/7 classics, and instead of being supported by subscriptions, being supported by ad revenue. It would also need more programming per month. The main shows would stay on stronger stations because rights fees are a key revenue stream these days, plus the lessons of the NFL doing the same thing are that football games on the NFL Network don't draw anywhere close to the audience as those on networks or ESPN. Vince was also quoted as being negative toward agents. Well, what promoter likes agents? I'm not a real fan of agents. As long as you are fair with everyone, why would you have an agent? It was noted that Vince himself has an agent. It said most of the wrestlers don't have agents. I can see undercard guys who are trying to keep their position not having agents, but most top guys have representation. And Ted DiBiase Jr.'s quote this week is that the days of wrestlers partying late nights and the days of groupies are over, as we'd rather go back to our hotels and play Nintendo. The reason I find that line funny is the first time I was given almost that exact line, minus the Nintendo, was 1987 by Pat Patterson, about how the days of guys going out for a 6-pack and to get laid after the show are over, and then less than a half hour later bumped into one of the top guys whose first 2 questions were about where he could go in San Francisco late at night to score coke and where he could go to get laid. Kind of like when Sammartino and Graham in 1991 were talking about the steroid problem in pro wrestling, and Jim Duggan said how the dressing room is completely different from when they were wrestling and how the guys train hard and eat right and all that stuff from their era is gone. A reporter who stayed with the WWE talent over the weekend and read the Times article joked about a more modern version of the same story, noting this weekend one WWE star stumbling out of the lobby elevator and nearly doing an ass bump in front of a lot of people because he had partied so much, which could have been dangerous given he had a bottle of wine stuffed down his back pocket. Internally, all week long, people in the company kept using the term Summerfest for SummerSlam, pretty much to represent how ridiculous it was to build a show around people who didn't know the first thing about the product. 12 rounds sold 332,000 units on DVD, which is considerably more than WrestleMania. For a comparison, Race to Witch Mountain starring Dwayne Johnson has sold 1,037,970 units for $18 million as of August 16, after being out for 2 weeks. The current plan is to do 8 straight-to-video releases over the next 3 years. Christian recently read for a part and noted others who are being looked at for movie leads are Morrison, Miz, and Ziggler. Raw notes from August 24 in Las Vegas, a unique show that reminded me of 1991. When Vince rented out this huge hall for a surprise birthday party for himself. This time, Vince used 2 hours of Raw at the Thomas and Mack Center for a surprise birthday party for himself, both on television, and a second version with his family after the cameras stopped rolling but still in front of the crowd. Even though the show was advertised around Floyd Mayweather Jr., it was clearly Vince's show. Noble pinned Alex Riley in the dark match. They taped one match for Superstars with Swagger pinning Primo Colon, and then Swagger challenged Kingston to a U.S. title match. The show opened with Orton, and them revealing Brett DiBiase, Ted's younger brother, as the mystery guy who attacked the nameless referee, Scott Armstrong, leading to one of the multiple restarts at SummerSlam. I've seen DiBiase on FCW, and he's a natural wrestler, like his brother, but it's rushing things to bring him to the main roster this early as, at least as of 5 weeks ago, he was still pretty green. Orton said that Brett was there as a fan, got caught up in the moment and ordered him to never interfere in one of his matches again. I like the segment because you had the heel being totally insincere trying to act outraged about interference that saved the match for him. Vince came out acting like a face for his birthday. He announced Cena vs. Orton as an I Quit match for Breaking Point. DX came out and they showed both a nice video of Vince and his family with lots of old and new footage, and then another of Vince constantly getting humiliated. Vince played along as the embarrassed good sport wanting to move on while we got a nearly 30-minute opening segment. Triple H said that Vince as a good guy doesn't work, and it's like Michael Vick being supported by PETA. They joked about Vince's age, he turned 64 that day, and for the record, the next time Vince has a birthday on a Monday is in 2015, first saying he was 84, then 74, then 70. Before this was over, we had Vegas showgirls dancing, some Circus du Soleil guys, an Elvis impersonator who Vince remarked was too skinny, and finally the return of Big Dick Johnson squiring baby oil while wearing a thong that was far too small. He's gotten fatter since his last appearance. Vince threw him out of the ring. Legacy attacked Michaels and Triple H at the end of the segment, which was pretty good for a second week in the timing sense because they had everyone in this comedic mood and they weren't thinking run-in. However, DX sold very little and it was a rushed beatdown just to set up Triple H, noting Mayweather hadn't arrived so he had to do the match announcement, setting up Vince and DX teaming together for the first time against Legacy. We don't have quarters at press time, but I'm guessing this segment did really good. It had that you can't change the channel vibe because you didn't know what would be next. Some of it was because it was so bad, and some was funny. But in the end, they've got to stop having the announcers do that fake laugh at the comedy segments because it makes the comedy come across as not funny at all, and the promotion come across as uncool. Miz pinned Morella in 2:04 with a stroke, after Morella missed a falling headbutt. Miz challenged Kingston again. WWE's Did You Know bragged about Raw beating Monday Night Football by 1 million viewers. Can you believe they are bragging about beating a preseason football game? During the show, Cole also called Raw the highest rated show on cable television, which hasn't been the case in months. Fox and Phoenix and Mendez beat Kelly and Kim and James in 2:34. They said Mayweather ordered them to do a boxing match, so they were all dressed up like women boxers. Well, not like any women boxers I've ever seen. Whoever dressed Mickie James should have been shot. They aren't doing anything to tease a Kim turn, so maybe that idea is already dropped. They were wearing MMA gloves instead of boxing gloves, and Lawler had no idea what the gloves were. They tried to build around boxing sequences. Anyway, not too good. Fox pinned James with an axe kick, so I guess it's Fox's turn to get in the title picture. They heavily promoted the WrestleMania special on NBC. They did a DX commercial where they plugged the WCW DVD. Hall was backstage dressed like Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday to Vince. Basically a spoof on Monroe singing Happy Birthday, Mr. President, when she was having an affair with JFK in the early 60s. In other words, they stole a pop culture reference 10 years older than what we see on TNA. Lawler said she looked like Monroe, but not Marilyn, but the president. There was a President Monroe in the 1820s. Jericho and Show came out and they said they weren't leaving the ring until Mayweather showed up. They noted how many people it took for Mayweather to beat Show at Mania. Eventually Mania and his entourage came out, all wearing t-shirts to plug his match with Marquez. The fans booed the hell out of Mayweather even though he was booked to be a face. Can you imagine they hadn't figured it out after last year? Mayweather got in Jericho and Show's face. Mayweather said he'd take them out except it was too close to his fight and they weren't worth it. Yeah, that's what babyfaces usually say in wrestling. The person who saved a segment that would have bombed was Jericho, because he was actually able to sorta get the people with Mayweather. Jericho noted that Marquez, whose name got a huge pop, would knock Mayweather out. Yes, WWE now does a better job of selling buys for boxing pay-per-view events than their own pay-per-view events. Mayweather ordered Jericho and Show versus Henry and MVP, and if Henry and MVP won, they could get a title shot at Breaking Point. Long match, with MVP working almost the entire way, which was a good thing by the end. The crowd treated MVP like he was a top babyface, and he sure hasn't been positioned as one. Mayweather pulled off some of his jewelry and threw it to MVP, who used it as brass knucks to knock out Jericho for the pin in 14:28. Funny finish with Show carrying an unconscious Jericho to the back. Orton and Legacy did a promo with Orton vowing that he would punt Vince, finish him for good, and this would be the last match Vince would ever make. They showed a video on the rise and fall of WCW, and then came back with this week's installment of Chavo vs. Hornswoggle. This time it was billed as a boxing exhibition, only Chavo had to use these gigantic gloves. Chavo had to box ridiculously bad and finally got frustrated and body-slammed Hornswoggle for the DQ in 106. Guerrero went for the frog splash when Bourne ran in. While it would be more entertaining for Bourne to feud with someone with more credibility than Guerrero, at this point we can only pray this spells the end of the Guerrero-Hornswoggle feud. There was a backstage segment of Vince throwing these super slow punches, well he is 64, with Mayweather feeding him the mitts. Carlito came out to complain. Vince asked Mayweather who would win in a fight between him and Ali in his prime. That was funny. DX came out and Triple H made a remark about winning fast so he could spend more time with Vince's daughter. Vince threw a punch that knocked Carlito out cold. Sucks to be him. Well, it's kind of sucked to be him for a while. DX and Vince beat Orton and DiBiase and Rhodes in 13:38. Triple H backflipped Michaels over the top onto all three to start the match. Vince only was in for seconds so he didn't hurt the match. The finish saw Orton walk off and head to the back, but Cena came out and caught him in the aisle. Should mention this was a no DQ match. Michaels superkicked Orton and then Cena gave him the attitude adjustment, allowing Vince to get the pin. Vince pinning Orton wasn't that bad because it was positioned clearly that Michaels and Cena finishing him did it. They didn't do a post-show main event. Instead, they called out Shane and Stephanie to entrance music, followed by Linda and Pat Patterson. Vince and Linda kissed in the ring and Patterson sang My Way, and led people in singing Happy Birthday to Vince. Notes from the August 25th tapings in Phoenix. SmackDown opened with Regal, Jackson and Kozlov coming out as the new headline heel trio without a name. Regal wanted a title rematch. Christian came out and kept making fun of him beating Regal in a SummerSlam record-setting 8 seconds. He kept saying 8 seconds over and over again. Then Christian kept calling Regal Bill. Regal said Bill is a commoner name and he doesn't want to be called that. Christian still called him Bill and the crowd started a chant. Tiffany came out. Every time she talks an entire nation thinks, so who is she doing to get interview time? She ordered a non-title rematch, and if Regal wins, he gets a title shot. Goldust double count out Sheamus in 3:57. They're trying to push this as a significant feud. Goldust has done a good job in making Sheamus somebody. Goldust used a flatliner for a near fall and then Sheamus rolled out of the ring. They brawled on the floor and were both counted out as Goldust whipped Sheamus into the ring steps. More rematches on the show. The Bella Twins were making Benjamin sing like Ray Charles. Ryder came out and tried to hit on the twins. They started arguing when Tiffany showed up again and ordered them to be partners in a tag match next. Courtney Taylor interviewed Burchill. who pushed that he would have a rematch with Hurricane on Superstars. Burchill noted that Hurricane is Gregory Helms. Katie seemed like she was ready to snap on Taylor at any moment. It was funny because Burchill talked about how Taylor was a dime a dozen interview girl and how they kept replaced immediately. Rex and Tatsu beat Benjamin and Ryder in 4 minutes when Tatsu pinned Ryder after a high kick. Benjamin and Ryder weren't getting along. Benjamin was in the ring and tagged Ryder, then flipped him into the ring. Ryder then threw Tatsu into Benjamin and went for his finisher, but Tatsu got out and used the high kick for the pin. It worked for what they were trying to do. Regal pinned Christian in 13:58. I'd go 3¼ stars and could have been 2 stars half with a little better finish, although the finish was part of storytelling to build to a pay-per-view match. Really good match that was getting better down the stretch. All kinds of near falls and the crowd reacted to these two like it was a main event. Kozlov and Jackson were at ringside but never interfered. Christian sucker punched Kozlov. A moment later, Regal whipped Christian into the ropes and Kozlov stuck his head in and head-butted Christian to the stomach. Regal then did his knee trembler, a running knee lift, for the pin. For Superstars, Burchill pinned Helms, so Helms is now slotted in that position. Actually not too bad because they've already decided where Helms is, and Burchill has improved so much as a worker and a promo, but the best they are going to do with him is just give him a nothing happening program, so at least this gives both TV time. Ziggler won a 3-way over Knox and Finlay on Superstars to become top contender for Mysterio. SmackDown opened with a Punk interview. They showed highlights of the TLC match and Punk talked about how even after a match like that, he took no pain medication. Jeff Hardy came out and they started arguing, leading to Punk challenging Hardy to a loser leaves town cage match for the main event. Matt Hardy and Morrison beat Kitt and Smith. Really strong match. Drew McIntyre returned and was scheduled to face R-Truth. McIntyre jumped him at the bell and left him laying, so looks to be starting a new program. Melina was warning Maria about Ziggler. She noted that when they were in Los Angeles this past week, she saw Ziggler out with another woman. His Nintendo must have been down that night. Melina pinned Layla. McCool was at ringside doing commentary. She was on crutches. After the match, Melina knocked her off her chair. They interviewed Knox, trying to get over his deal where he's a wildman who is also a smart bookworm. Finlay attacked Knox. Jericho vs. JTG turned into a tag match with Jericho and Show over Crime Time. Show pinned Shad after the knockout punch. Mysterio beat Kane via DQ. Apparently they botched one spot big. I'll bet this isn't TNA and the spot isn't there by Friday. Kane posted Mysterio for the DQ. Khali ran in. Well, he walked in and went after Kane. Ziggler then ran in and attacked the down Mysterio. Punk beat Jeff Hardy in the cage match. Said to be excellent. After losing, Jeff did a farewell interview, but did say that he would be back. Before he could say when, Punk attacked him again. This led to Undertaker making a save and choke-slamming Punk. The show ended with a dark match with Cena and DX over DiBiase and Rhodes and Orton. No Abraham Washington show this week and nobody missed it either. It was acknowledged in passing during the Benjamin and Ryder promo spot. SmackDown notes from the August 21st TV show by Brian Alvarez. Show wasn't as good as weeks past, but still some good stuff, and certainly a better go-home show than Raw was the previous Monday. Opener was great as Ziggler and Show and Jericho beat Mysterio and Crime Time when Ziggler actually got to get a pin on Ray. The finish was awesome as Mysterio was making this huge comeback. He hit Ziggler with a 619, and then as he was about to go for the springboard, Big Show on the outside gave him the knockout punch and Ziggler covered him for the win. Very similar to Sunday's tag title match as well. Matt Hardy interview where he explained that he loved his brother and had always tried to protect him, and that he'd lost his mind a bit when Jeff won the title and had done all of these horrible things that he was now very remorseful about. In fact, he said, it was the biggest mistake of his life. This was good because oftentimes in wrestling things happen that don't necessarily make sense and nobody bothers to try to make sense of it. The bad news is that this was a jaded crowd, as you could tell they weren't buying a word he said and were expecting him to turn on his brother later. Kane came out and cut a promo apparently written by a 13-year-old saying he was going to end the myth of Khali once and for all at SummerSlam. I was trying to figure out what the myth of Khali was, because it's not that can work. Khali lumbered out, stomped on him a bit and grabbed a chair, but Kane bailed to tease the match further. This was a fail. Knox beat Finlay. Stupidest finish in a while. Knox, who was being pushed as this educated madman, got the mount and was raining down punches on Fit. Fit sold it as if he'd been knocked unconscious. The ref, however, had asked Knox to break on 5, and he didn't, so it was a DQ. Yes, Knox beat him up so terribly that it cost him the match. Which begs the question, if Knox was going to beat Fit into complete unconsciousness, why didn't they just let him win the match? Knox hit him with the steps afterwards for good measure. Jeff and Punk came out and did the go-home promo for the pay-per-view. It was the usual stuff, with Jeff talking about what a free spirit he was and Punk accusing him of being a drug-addled fiend. He even accused him of being drunk during the promo. He said Jeff was so nutty that he probably thought he could fly, and Jeff said, "No, my spirit tells me I can." What a stupid line. Anyway, Punk said let's find out and tipped over a ladder that Jeff was sitting on. Jeff landed on his feet and gave Punk the twist of fate to lay him out. It was awesome because he gave him this move, and as he was doing so the ladder tipped over. It hit the top rope, but managed to graze Hardy's head in mid-move as well. He sold it great even though it clearly hardly touched him. It was awesome because it was an unplanned moment that actually made the match seem even more dangerous and unpredictable. I should also note that Jeff Hardy has walked under ladders on 2 different occasions so far, and both times he ended up losing the match. So don't mess with superstitions. Melina and Maria beat Natalya and Layla. Layla worked most of the match, and Natalya got pinned by Melina. Not how I'd have booked it, that's for sure. Main was Hardys and Morrison beating Punk and Hart Dynasty. Fun match, but not as good as the opener. Matt worked without his shirt and looked better than I expected, coming back 3 weeks early from abdominal surgery. Jeff got the hot tag and they did some dive spots and such. Finish saw Jeff snap Punk's neck over the top rope, then Matt hit the twist of fate on Punk for the pin. No idea why Matt got the pin and not Jeff. You'd think to set up a new challenger, but apparently the next challenger is Undertaker. Matt raised Jeff's hand afterwards and they celebrated in a brotherly manner. Lance Storm got 4 of his trainees a look at the tapings in Calgary. He wanted one student in particular to be given a serious look. Storm even wrestled one of his students in a match before Raw started in Calgary in front of WWE agents. 2 others worked as enhancement guys on the Edmonton ECW tapings. Kevin Martel worked as Kevin Brooks in getting destroyed by Kozlov and then Jackson. Tom Hahn, who works as T-Bone in Canadian Indies, worked as Tom James, losing to Rex. There are reports that the crackdown on marijuana has somewhat subsided. Some users who had gone clean due to office pressure are no longer feeling that pressure. Sergeant Slaughter claimed he was offered a sponsorship deal with Hasbro and Vince McMahon was agreeable to be part of it, but that the WWE attorneys nixed it, for fear Yak Pacific, who WWE is in a lame duck relationship with before they start with Mattel, could sue over violating the exclusivity. Slaughter's nephew was recently killed overseas serving in the military. Punk has been doing the deal where he pretends to be knocked out for several minutes at the end of the show, not just at the Kansas City TV taping but also did it at least one time at another live event where he just laid there forever, not getting up, at the end of the show. There was a story in the Nashville Tennessean on players are battling odds of making the Titans. One tight end Matthew Mulligan, 6'4", 270, which in wrestling would be closer to 6'7", who joined the team last season, said he's considering training for pro wrestling if he's cut, and as the 5th tight end of the depth charts, his odds aren't good. It noted he was good friends with former WWE wrestler Maven Huffman, who encouraged him to try out. SmackDown vs. Raw 2010 will be released on October 20th. If you pre-order at GameStop/EB Games, you get a code to unlock Steve Austin in PS3 and Xbox 360. You can create your own storylines, finishes, and wrestlers. You can write a storyline as short as a single episode of Raw or as long as a few months. If it was realistic, you should be able to write a storyline of a few months and then have a magic editor change it weekly, so by week 4, you are nowhere near your original concept. You can also edit the colors and ring gear of the wrestlers in the game. Tony Atlas has not been released. His name was taken off the ECW roster pages, but he is still getting a downside guarantee, and they at least are saying that they have him in mind regarding possibly managing someone. They were setting up an angle where Atlas would go face when Henry would fire him and turn on him, but that was dropped cold when the decision was made to move Henry to Raw and babyface him. Atlas, Jimmy Hart, Sergeant Slaughter and Piper were all brought in for the fan axes. That didn't get good reviews, with people complaining because it was held outside and it was so hot that most people there were miserable. They had an estimated 6,000 to 7,000, which is nothing like Mania or UFC's Fan Fest, which did an estimated 30,000 to 50,000. This was more a first-time effort with the idea of trying to make SummerSlam into a second WrestleMania as an even bigger event. Chris Jericho did a Baltimore Sun interview noting how disappointed the planned Edge angle didn't get to play out. The plans were for Jericho and Edge to do a turn to build likely for Mania. It was disappointing because I think we had a great storyline in the works, with a lot of trips and traps that were going to lead to a certain place. He was then told the Office chose Show as his new partner and he backed the decision. Everyone he said it had to be Dolph Ziggler or The Miz. No, this is about world champions at the top of their game who have a certain stature. Yeah, it would help them, but it wouldn't help me. We're trying to reinvigorate the tag title and reinvigorate Big Show as well. The guy's a giant. He's a commodity and people need to be reminded of that and we need to start promoting that. On not being pushed in WCW and top guys not willing to work with him, it wasn't reluctance, it was denial. They just wouldn't do it and it ticked me off so much because there was a lot of money left on the table. It's something that I said that I would never do. We're in a crisis period in way and we need to build new guys. When Shawn Michaels came back to Raw he said, "Who's been built since I left?" On SmackDown, we've built Morrison and Ziggler and Crime Time. The Intercontinental title has been rebuilt now with Rey Mysterio. But I can't tell you on Raw who has been built over the last 6 months. They better do it soon, because when this generation of performers is gone, who will replace them? He also put over working with Shaq. He also praised Freddie Prinze Jr. and Seth Green. Reporter Kevin Eck, after the interview when asked about him not mentioning the show with Piven, said, "I think he did mention it when he said some shows will suck." Cody Rhodes on the lack of a new breakout star. I personally think that when people say stuff like that, when people say there hasn't been a breakout, I ask them if they saw the last breakout coming. Did anyone foresee Stone Cold Steve Austin? Did anyone see John Cena coming? If anyone tells you yes, then they're lying to you. Monday Night Raw is like a varsity team. And it's filled with freshmen. Very talented, very young, but it's something that fans are now getting to grow with. It's a cool experience. I can remember Michaels, Rhodes' favorite wrestler growing up, going from tag to IC champion to taking the longest run possible to the WWE Championship / I think it might be a while till somebody becomes that breakout star, but I know that you have a lot of hopefuls, mentioning himself, DiBiase, Bourne, Swagger and Kingston. Actually, I can't say people predicted Stone Cold Steve Austin ahead of time, but when Austin was breaking in on the Dallas circuit feuding with Chris Adams, after only a few months in the business, he was pretty much pegged as the next Ric Flair, which was pretty high praise. I wasn't sure at the time he'd be the next Flair. Because that's a combination of charisma, promos and working ability, and at the time, you saw some charisma and great athletic and working ability for his experience level, but I wasn't convinced he'd be the next Flair. I did think he'd be a long-term major promotion headliner, but who could have predicted Stone Cold level? Now when it comes to Dwayne Johnson, I can tell you that after his first dark match that Jim Cornette, Jim Ross and Pat Patterson all said he would be the biggest star in the business by 2000, and the only thing they were wrong on is he had to deal with coming along at the same time as Austin. And as far as Cena went, geez, he was being pegged by as the next Sting-level star when he was still in UPW, and pretty much every good judge of talent he came across in his early years pegged him to get pretty damn close to where he got because of his look and his promos. The Miz now believes he beat Daniel Puder in that boxing match at the Armageddon pay-per-view. I actually won it, but the fans liked Puder more, he said in the Miami Herald. If it was scored by a boxing judge, I would have won, but if it's scored by the WWE audience who absolutely hates me, I will lose every time. In actuality, Miz probably did win the first round close and in a sense got a moral victory because he lasted 3 one-minute rounds when most pegged him to get knocked out. But Puder easily won rounds 2 and 3, as Miz was gassed, and did little but just try to constantly grab a clinch to stall out time. During both of those rounds, Al Snow on commentary made mention that Miz is about to go, be finished. Puder was backstage at SummerSlam and was talking with John Laurinaitis, but I don't see him coming in. He'd need a long time in developmental and his MMA career would have to fizzle out before that would happen, and even then there is no guarantee WWE would have interest. Also backstage were RVD, since he lives in Los Angeles, and Amy DeMarlita, who has been now to several shows of late. At SummerSlam, Jim Ross, Miz, Kim, Show and Stephanie McMahon filled a segment for the Food Network's Dinner Impossible show that will air in November. The September 3rd show in Fajardo, Puerto Rico was canceled. They are doing a promotion versus promotion angle with FCW versus FSWXW out of Leesburg, Florida. FCW was running a show in Leesburg and FA marched in a group of his wrestlers including Haku and Ricky Santana to start an angle. Santana said FCW was filled with nothing but second-generation nobodies. They did a beatdown on the Rotunda brothers and Brett DiBiase in particular and spray-painted WXW on their backs, which led to an argument with FA and Steve Keirn. We should have a rise and fall of WCW DVD review next week. Everyone I've spoken to that has seen it has had nothing good to say about it, which isn't a good sign.